I don't know what it is about Warhammer 40k, but the franchise seems to have trouble producing games that attract the attention of the gaming industry as a whole. Many games in the franchise are either blatant cash grabs or downright bad due to poor gameplay or a severe lack of quality in general. I'm Jeficus, and I love Warhammer 40k, especially Warhammer 40k games. There are 3 games in the entire history of the franchise that stand out as the absolute best of the best, and 2 games that aren't quite as mainstream as the others, but deserve to be included as honorable mentions in this video nonetheless. And these games are Dawn of War, Space Marine, and Darktide. I'll reveal my honorable mentions at the end of this video because they absolutely deserve your attention. But for now, let's jump right into it with Warhammer 40,000 Dawn of War. This RTS was developed by Relic Entertainment and released in 2004, but is still considered the GOAT of all 40k games. Personally, when I talk about Dawn of War, I'm referring to the original game, Dawn of War 2, and all of their expansions. I heard a rumor that a Dawn of War 3 was developed, but I looked into it and this is actually just an elaborate meme. Some fans got together and decided to troll the entire Warhammer community. All of the footage online that you see of a potential Dawn of War 3 game was probably made with AI or something. It's all fake and you could just ignore it. Anyways, returning to games that are actually real, I need you to understand the impact that Dawn of War had on gaming back then. By 2009, Dawn of War and its expansions had sold 4 million copies, which was a pretty big deal. This game single-handedly introduced me to Warhammer 40k, and I'd be willing to wager that it was a lot of other people's first foray into the franchise as well. But what exactly made Dawn of War so great? Well, you see, Dawn of War wasn't designed to be a competitive real-time strategy game like StarCraft was. The game had a major element that StarCraft lacked, which is crazy considering that StarCraft was heavily influenced by Warhammer 40k. Dawn of War had style. Relic Entertainment knew exactly who they were making the game for: Warhammer fans and potential Warhammer fans. A good example of this is right off the get-go, before you even get into the game, you could paint your armies just like you would for the tabletop game. And the game did have a skirmish mode and multiplayer, but honestly the premier experience was all in the campaign, specifically the campaigns for the Dark Crusade and Soulstorm expansions. The developers took inspiration from Total War and Risk to make a campaign where your army needed to conquer entire planets province by province. Almost every major faction in Warhammer 40k was represented in Dawn of War by the time Soulstorm was released, except for the Tyranids, who would make their debut in the sequel. This meant that by the time Soulstorm rolled around, you could potentially play or play against Space Marines, Chaos, Eldari, Orcs, Imperial Guard, Tau, Necrons, Sisters of Battle, and Drukhari. And I already know that there's going to be someone complaining in the comments about how the Adeptus Mechanicus wasn't a playable faction, but listen, the actual Mechanicus game didn't come out until 2018. The number of OG Mechanicus fans that existed before the game came out is a very small number, especially when you consider the Codex didn't come out until 2015. Anyways, once you picked your army and started up the campaign, you were in for a wild ride. Melee combat was absolutely brutal and featured execution-style animations that weren't previously seen in any other RTS game. The variety of units that you were able to build was expansive, and the game did a really good job of showcasing a lot of the weapons and technology featured in 40k. And the voice lines and voice acting for various units was just plain iconic.
We are chaos. Yes, chaos is strong.
For the dark gods! Yes, master! For the dark gods!
Cross me and die.
On the other side of the coin, we have Dawn of War 2, which did away with the planetary-wide campaigns and focused on delivering a narrative for the Bloodraven Space Marines. This was creative, but it was an absolute mistake that would only be slightly rectified when Relic Entertainment made the other factions in the game playable in the Retribution expansion. Dawn of War 2 seemed like Relic Entertainment's attempt to make a more competitive and replayable experience where players would find more entertainment playing against one another in multiplayer. Unfortunately, competitive multiplayer wouldn't take off like StarCraft did, especially considering that StarCraft 2 would release a year after Dawn of War 2 made its debut. But what Dawn of War 2 did have was Last Stand, which single-handedly made Dawn of War 2 Retribution my favorite iteration of Dawn of War. In Last Stand, you controlled a single hero character and survived against wave after wave of enemies. The game mode had its own hero progression, competitive ladder, and a good amount of challenge. I can't believe that in an age of seemingly endless Warhammer 40k games that are simply clones of other games in various genres, nobody has decided to remake The Last Stand. With some modern polish, more intuitive controls, and a live service model with consistent updates, new heroes, new maps, and different enemies, a remake of The Last Stand would absolutely kill it in today's gaming climate. Honestly, I think my love of Last Stand is why I like Darktide so much. Additionally, I'm surprised that a game like Dawn of War hasn't been remade or remastered yet. I don't know what Relic Entertainment is doing in 2024, but if they're still holding on to the Dawn of War franchise, then they need to get to work. Fortunately, Dawn of War wasn't the only banger of a game that Relic Entertainment delivered back in the old days. Space Marine actually wasn't received with the highest praise in the world at the time of its release in 2011. A lot of reviewers saw the game as pretty average. The main problem with the game was that it was a third-person shooter and/or action game that was released 2 weeks before Gears of War 3, which was the king of the third-person shooter genre at the time. There were a lot of people who looked at Space Marine as a Gears of War clone but with a fresh coat of Warhammer 40k. But anybody who played the game knew that the game wasn't like Gears of War at all. Space Marine had an emphasis on melee combat, and to this day it still has one of the most solid melee combat systems in a 40k game. This is important because even though Warhammer 40k is a sci-fi setting with space guns and lasers, it has a unique emphasis on a wide variety of really cool melee weapons that is unlike any other sci-fi setting. But the true gift that Space Marine delivered was definitely its gameplay. It was just so satisfying being able to play as this ripped, armored Ultramarine that was able to fire ridiculously high caliber explosive weapons and tear both orcs and heretics apart in melee. Outside of the campaign, you had multiplayer, and Relic Entertainment actually put a lot of effort into making it a satisfying and replayable experience. When it worked, PvP actually felt pretty good, but a lot more people that I knew spent their time in Exterminatus, which was the spiritual successor to the Last Stand game mode in Dawn of War 2. Are you starting to understand how big of a deal the Last Stand was? Have I glazed it enough? In Exterminatus, your team of 4 Space Marines faced wave after wave of enemies in an attempt to not only survive, but get the highest score possible so that you could top the leaderboards. Space Marine marked an important chapter in the history of 40k games, and I hope that Space Marine 2 is better in every way. Now let's move away from Relic Entertainment because not every good 40k game was made by them. The game developer Fatshark released Warhammer 40k Darktide in 2022. Darktide is heavily inspired from Fatshark's Warhammer Fantasy game Vermintide 2, which in turn is heavily inspired by Left 4 Dead. That is to say that it's a co-op horde-based first-person shooter with RPG elements. I think that Darktide improves upon the systems available in Left 4 Dead by adding character progression, significantly better gameplay, better graphics, and much better music. Here, check it out. When all of these elements line up in Darktide, the game just hits so well. Unfortunately, I also think that Darktide actually suffers underneath the weight of its graphical performance and poor optimization. Darktide isn't optimized well at all, and if you're not running it on a good machine, it's not uncommon to see frame drops or for the game to just completely brick your console or PC. The game is heavily carried by its gameplay, but that's not the only reason why it's on this list. I would consider Darktide to be Warhammer 40k's first big live service game outside of the mobile gaming industry. Fatshark is showing other developers that the model can work for Warhammer 40k games, but it's ironic because compared to other studios that run live service games, Fatshark releases content at the pace of a sprinting snail. Darktide will continue to perform well for the niche of players that it's made for, even when Space Marine 2 launches, but it's going to take a long time to mature, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. The game doesn't have a subscription model, so it's perfectly fine if you just put it down and pick it up again later. That about wraps it up for Darktide, so let's get into those honorary mentions. The last games that I need to talk about are Mechanicus, developed by Bulwark Studios, and Boltgun, developed by Auroch Digital. Starting off with Mechanicus, I don't typically play games for their story, nor am I typically a fan of tactical games, but Mechanicus drew me in with its exquisite stylistic graphics and alluring music. The high quality of Mechanicus hooked me to the game, and kept me engaged throughout my entire experience. As you play, you really notice the attention to detail that the developers at Bulwark Studios exercised when crafting the game. Mechanicus didn't break records in the industry for making tons of money, nor has it attracted a large player base. It's simply a small, high-quality game that other developers in the industry need to learn from. Boltgun is in the exact same boat, but where Mechanicus is a chill, atmospheric game, Boltgun is a high-octane rock-and-roll shoot-'em-up. Auroch Digital set off to create a Doom-like boomer shooter and did a really good job. The game just makes you feel like you're one of the most powerful Space Marines in all of 40k. What hooked me to the game was its variety of weapons, intensity, secrets, and its unique stylistic graphics. These games prove that Warhammer games in general don't need to be massive AAA titles to be good. As long as the developer knows what game they're making and who they're making it for, delivering a good game should be easy. If I didn't include a game that you feel should be on this list, then let me know in the comments below. I really want to know what games you guys like. I tried to keep this as concise as possible while specifically targeting the industry's heavy hitters. Anyways, thanks for watching, and as always, this has been Jeficus, and I'll see you in-game.